So call to order a subcommittee of the school building committee, finance subcommittee, special meeting. It's March 11, 2022. So there are 3 of us on this subcommittee, myself, Peter, do I say your name right? Is it Latimsik?
Close enough.
Okay, I have one of those, you know, and Justin DeJerno. So I guess the first thing I would say is that we need a chairperson for this committee.
Good idea.
Good idea.
Also, let's want to operate as a committee.
Yep.
How did
they all just, somebody said they do it.
The land evaluation,
Yeah.
how they do it?
None of them.
Mike just volunteered.
Yeah, Phil just volunteered. So I'm okay if one of you wants to, and you know, it's up to.
I know I suggested this committee, so I'll be happy to do it if you guys are good with it.
I'll be happy with that. That's perfectly fine. All right. So.
I would rather only just because of trying to learn all of the rules and regulations behind it also as I'm doing this. So
hopefully that's easier in a subcommittee.
It's much easier in a subcommittee.
We're
not taking any, we're not really voting. We don't have really any
take
power.
minutes?
We do have to take minutes. Yep, that we do.
But we have the recording.
Yeah, this will be on the Zoom by well, in this case by morning. No, I can do it when I get back into my office. So I can put this on Zoom. So yeah, so that is available.
But we need official minutes.
We need official minutes. So we have 7 days to post them, just like any others.
We want the minutes.
I can try.
Try.
I
need to have the recording to look at.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, less is more minutes.
Yes, especially with our subcommittees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's informal.
Yeah, and I think some of our board committee, it's good later, but I think we've gone a little bit too far into detail in our minutes. So yeah, less is more, I think. So we'll help you out with them when you get them all set. All right. So I started very brief, and Scott, as I said to you, we were looking at, and I'll turn this over to Peter. The item we put on the agenda was school building committee financial data and discussion, so we can begin to decide what it is we want to look at. Without a project, Scott certainly doesn't have cost figures for us at this point in the game, but that would be too preliminary. So Peter, I know you said you had some thoughts about things you wanted us to talk about and look into, so I will turn the floor to you.
I do. I imagine it must be fairly common to have some kind of committee like this for any school building committee, but tell me if I'm wrong. That I would think that the financials of this project are important. So I think it's good to do it in a subcommittee way, so we can just kind of provide information to the full committee in kind of a, these are the numbers approach.
I agree.
Does that make sense to people listening? Or I just think, you know, because when we're in a full committee, everyone has their idea of what they want to do or not do, and then Scott will weigh in and say, well, this is what we can do. But it would be nice to be able to just look at the costs for this project, how we're going to present those costs to the community, and be able to organize that information and then go back to the full committee. I just thought that made sense without all the other, like, we won't get involved in land evaluation because other people are doing it.
Rather than having 11 people having a discussion in a meeting, you know, where there are 15 other things on the agenda, I think it makes sense to discuss here. Is it common, Scott?
Yeah, more so once you're under construction. But, you know, I definitely see the need. I mean, it helps streamline things at some of your building committee meetings if, you know, there's confidence and they're taking direction from a finance working group or finance subcommittee. You know, certainly once we get in, you know, you can meet with your financial advisor, talk about potentially how the project's going to be bonded. Once we get the two concepts developed, being either the renovation or a new construction project, you know, we'll be looking at construction timelines. At that point, we're going to produce a full project budget for you, not just construction costs, all soft costs. You know, so we're going to want to meet with your bonding counsel. We're going to want to talk about how they intend to bond the project so we can set aside those costs as well. At that point, then we'll take a look at the overall project schedule, not only for creation of the construction documents, state reviews, but construction period itself. And we will create a cash flow analysis for each scenario. So again, that would assist your bonding authority in looking at the cash flow, looking at the availability that the town has, and at what time you might have to, float some bands, or how you might bond the project, which certainly, affects overall costs to the district and mill rate impacts. And then I would assume with this committee as well, and working with Phil, if we're looking at overall financials, potentially with a codification of 2 schools, there may also be cost savings and other things that this committee would be, looking into as far as staffing reductions, long-term maintenance of facilities. And again, those can be factored into information to the public as far as not just the bricks and mortar cost of building the school, but then developing a 5, 10, 20-year outlook on what it's going to cost to maintain either a renovated or new school facility.
Perfect. That's kind of what I thought.
Yes. Yeah.
And once you're under construction, we see a finance subcommittee very helpful, because what we typically do with that group is we review in detail the application for payment from the contractors, the invoices, any proposed changes or change orders. So when we get to the full committee level, we don't spend, let's just say, an extra hour discussing those things. If there's a,
right.
if there's a subcommittee, right. The subcommittee's vetted those. And in some cases, we've reviewed those on a preliminary basis and said we're not ready to present those to the full committee, but the subcommittee is aware of pending cost impacts.
Yeah.
They've vetted them, and then the full committee looks to them as a resource and says, have you guys vetted this? The answer is yes. Here's your invoice packet this evening for approval, and it really helps to streamline the full committee meetings.
That's the experience I had before when I was on the board of ed. I was on the finance subcommittee. We reviewed all the bills.
Yep.
Now the full board didn't go through all, so
it was a formality.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I don't even remember when I was on the board of ed. I don't think we did anything with them. Just that the report was at the finance committee. And I think in this case it would be a little bit more. I think
that's good, because the full committee will have lots more else to do.
Well, I think it's easy to get into the weeds at that point, and if the work has been done and vetted out, at some point, there needs to be some trust in the subcommittee, the members who are doing the work there.
Completely agree. So that's further down the road, Scott, and I get what you're saying. Where we are now is, Erica, I'm so glad you said this the other night at the selectmen's meeting. We haven't even determined we're going to do a project. Right. And that's really troubling me, because in the big meetings, we're talking about land acquisition and all these things. And I'm saying, like, if you're a member of the community, you were following this, our committee hasn't said we're even pursuing a project, but we're pursuing elements of the project. So
I would say that the reason the school building committee was created was because we are to bring a project to the committee. We haven't decided one path, and Scott, maybe we're unusual in this, and that most schools have determined, or most towns have determined their path. But my interpretation is that we will be bringing a project to townspeople to vote in referendum. We just don't know what that will be. We need those cost implications prior to that, and that's what we're working on now with you, is what that will look like. But we don't have A or B mapped out, but I think by the time we get to a referendum, we'll be ready to say,
agree,
one is going to happen, one is not.
I think this committee can help us focus in better.
Okay.
And this is my thought, and I want to know what you guys think. Right now, we don't have the ed specs. I know you're working on them, Scott, with Phil diligently. So it would be hard for us to evaluate the 2 possibilities we have right now, because we don't know what context to evaluate them in, right? Whether it's renovate or new, we need to see the ed specs you're going to bring back, I guess, with Phil, apply them to those 2 options and say, okay, now we have a sense of what this could be either way. And at least put like a macro cost to each one, even before we get down the line to where we select one and we're doing detailed costs. Does that make sense, Scott?
No, you'll absolutely have a full project budget for each as part of the decision-making process. But yeah, it is at this point we're gathering the information we need to be able to put these two options together. You know, one is very important, the ed spec. And again, I trying to be very sensitive to the fact that the ed spec is really, the Board of Ed controls the ed spec. The Board of Ed controls how the children of Willington are educated. So it really needs to, we've given examples, we've helped put together the basis of the overall building components with Phil. Phil's now working on that with his board. But we just have to make sure that we are respectful of the process of the board defining the ed spec, so then that we can take that as a tool and apply it both to a potential renovation project and or know what the size of a building would be and the components going into a new construction project.
Understood. So what I'm thinking is that this committee could take those two possibilities, new or renovate. We get back some feedback on what the ed specs are. And then we can say, okay, a new school would be X number of square feet, X number of land, development costs, purchase, site work, just basic numbers, square foot numbers, Scott. And then we could see how that compares potentially with doing the same ed specs if we renovate. And then we can have a full discussion bringing those numbers back to the full committee. But I don't see how we can even do that now because we don't have the ed specs yet.
Right. And I think that's what Scott had even alluded to in our regular meeting. Until we get those, we're so preliminary. And I apologize, as I should have written down my thought as we were going. One of the things I was thinking about analyzing is in what way can we do that prior to having those ed specs? Like, what direction could we be looking in financial? I know one of the things we could add on to is whether or not the state in our reimbursement packet is going to reimburse based on the number of students and square footage. Anything above that, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, is on the town in full, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so one of the things we can look at, analyze, so we have a 63,000 square foot building. So let's say that the state says, based on your population, we would only cover 60,000. And we were building a 65,000, or we decided
go
beyond, or we wanted
like the auditorium that people don't poll.
Correct, and that's something that came up from the Board of Ed. So one of the things we look at and analyze separate to bring to the full committee is what cost would look like if we added more
extras
than what the state would reimburse.
Extras beyond the state.
Correct. Like, we understand the community may want a full auditorium. And what would that look like based on these numbers, and help them come up with those costs? And is it something we would want to look at it? What other ways could we fund those? What other creative solutions could we come up to fund something like an auditorium?
Sure. No, I like the idea of looking at, we can look at costs for extras, as well as this whole demo thing of the existing schools. So what does that represent to the town if we, let's say we wind up demolishing both schools and build a new school on a new site, then we know that's going to be a significant cost to the town. What is it? I know Scott, you said 30,000 square foot typically for demo in our previous meeting, but maybe we could explore that further. What does this mean? What about all these brown site costs that you hear about, and stuff like that? And
what is the difference between that and attempting to sell the land, right? So can we look at some of those things?
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to demolish a building. Especially if you looked for developers, brought some developers in, and said, "What can you do? Give us a proposal for this parcel." And you say it's as is. You're going to take it. Here's all our information on the building. You've got good phase one. You've got your asbestos management reports that document everything that's in the existing buildings. But it's not necessarily incumbent upon you, or necessarily in your favor financially, to take the buildings down. You know, it may have some value.
There could be a repurpose.
Could be.
I was going to say this to us as a group here, because we all live in Wellington.
Yeah.
I think the possibility of the town funding a new school and then say funding a repurpose in another big capital project for a new town office building or rec center is unlikely. That's my only concern. It sounds great.
Short term, I would say, yes, I agree with you. But at the same time, like you look at the Hall School, if we didn't use Hall School for a school, we wouldn't be bringing it up to school specs to do renovations to it.
Because you could use it.
Yeah, but could,
you know, and I think again, you know, part of, you know, and what we're going to be doing, and I think we've looked at another. We got quite an extensive list from the town planner the other day, but there was a list that we had been provided that the Board of Ed had looked at, I believe, within the last year or two. So we've looked at another 30, 40 sites. And again, I think it's going to be very important that we have the meeting with the state and we have two options in hand that we understand that could work, and sit down with the state and say, you know, which option are you going to, you know, will you support both? Or will you only support one? I do know that there were conversations with Mr. Diamantis. Certainly, as everyone knows, he is no longer with the state. So I do think we need to start fresh there and have a new dialogue as far as what the state would and would not support. But, you know, certainly we can't go to the state and say, we want to build a new school, but we don't know where we're going to build it and we don't have a site yet. I mean, I think we at least need to not have purchased a site, but we at least have to identify a few parcels that will support a school that we feel, you know, if we approach either public land or approach a landowner, that, you know, we have a deal that we can put on the table. You know, because I don't want to go to the state and have them, you know, say, we're not going to support putting money into a renovation project, but we don't have another option.
If I could just ask you a question about that, guys. I was thinking the same thing. How do you show ourselves, let alone the state, the new school model without having a site? But this whole site thing seems very cumbersome to me. So I have a question. Just for like this finance subcommittee's purposes, if we get to the point where we have some sense of what your ed specs are, and we can have a simple spreadsheet, new, renovated, and then on the new side, could we plug in, say, a number for a 20-acre site and say, yes, at current market values, that's going to be X gazillion dollars?
Yeah, we can absolutely make assumptions. You know, we'll say, okay, we know the purchase price is $500,000, and we've done similar sites developed with soccer, baseball. We can kind of rough out what grading we're going to be, and we're going to say this is a $7 million site, and we're going to say, you know, building costs right now on average, you're looking at just over $400 a square foot. You know, and then you've got to add in all your soft costs, your design fees, financing, insurance, testing lab fees, all those other intangibles that a lot of times, you know, when you go to an architect and they give you a budget, they give you a construction budget, and they forget about the other 20% of costs coming down the pike.
Oh, you can't do that.
Are all part of the overall project budget.
But it can't be uncommon to get to a certain point where you start having a discussion with the state and not have, if it's not land that towns own, not having land purchase. That must be common to go in with, and I get what you want to buy, but that may be contingent on whether or not a project happens.
Yeah, and once we get to that point, and then if we pursue a piece of land, there's a process of getting the state to approve that piece of land. It's called the SCG 053 document, and you've got to provide certain Corps of Engineer documents, wetland documents, survey, 2 appraisals of the land. The state will come out and walk the land with you, you know, and then they will sign off on the land, because again, they're not going to pay, you know, a good percentage of the cost to put a school on a piece of land that they don't feel is appropriate, was approved, or may have issues. You know, so they will be partners with you in reviewing and approving that parcel for funding.
I mean, that's what I thought. And one of the things, look, we know once there's a project, and even a project ready to take to referendum, we're going to have a lot more to look at. But one of the things that the whole committee's charge is to look at the 2 schools and if one or both of them are not used. And while we may not embark immediately on a repurpose of one of those, we're going to be talking about what we recommend to bring to. So would it be appropriate for this committee to look at the numbers of if we were to sell one of the 2 of them, what that would look like if we were to sell both of them? That's assuming we take ownership of Hall School when it's not used as a school. And work up some figures of what it would cost to repurpose one of the 2 of them for the town's purposes. Just because we may not move forward with it, if we could do some preliminary higher level view of what it would cost to turn, say, Center School or Hall School into a town office building. That has been one of the things that community members have said, couldn't you use it for? Could we? We could use them for anything, right? And so yes, and we may not embark on that project, but give the community a real sense of, we could move this building down the road to Center School, but here's what it would cost. Here's
from a capital project, I know, Erica, you've already got a good handle on this, but you know, we want to be looking at your current mill rate, your current impact. You know, what have you got out there as far as bonds already? What capital improvement projects, other capital improvement projects are coming down? So when we go to present a project to the town and to the people, you're going to want to present a whole picture of impact of mill rate. And it's not necessarily just this project. You will present this project as this project is affecting, let's say, 1.25 mils in the highest level year. But then you're also going to want to look at your overall debt impact and any other projects, so the town understands the full financial implications of the decision.
So glad you're saying that, Scott, because that's exactly how our town thinks. And yes, we could repurpose one of these buildings and it could sit at, like Justin's saying, but while it's sitting, we're going to have to put roofs on it, maintain it, heat it. And if we go down that road, we have to present those costs to the community. That's why I'm concerned about it.
Well, we know today they both need roofs. We know that.
We know that. And what we definitely don't want, I don't know if you're familiar with Stafford, Scott, but that Witt school situation they have, woo, that is really scary.
Right. It's easy to just say we'll use it down the road.
Right, and then you wind up with a
correct
Witt school.
Yeah, if you don't need them,
that they understand, like Scott's saying, the full impact, and the town could say, we're not even sure down the road we want to embark on that kind of cost, or why wouldn't we do something sooner so that we don't end up with a Witt school? But having us do some of that financial work. I
completely agree. And when we go back to the full building committee, we could say, you know, do we want to embark on a capital? We would have to do the roofs right away.
Right.
So it would be potentially a new school project and 2 new roofs on 2 schools. Right. And the state said no to that. So like, and Wellington's going to say yes.
Well, I think the state,
kind of a weird
the state said no because they weren't willing to put the bill for 2 projects for school.
No,
that's why they said
so I get that, but now we're saying to the taxpayer, now you should do it.
Right.
You know, so you know, we have to have a good discussion, but that's a full discussion for the full committee. We can pull the numbers together with Scott's help.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. If we bring those numbers as part of the discussion of, all right, what do you see happening? What are some of our potential uses? And then we can work some numbers in that to give a full scope. When we sit down at, you know, some of these public hearings, people are going to ask, well, what are you going to do with the buildings? What is that going to cost us?
And there's going to be people partial to center, people partial to hall. It'll get very emotional. That's correct. And all of that.
It always does.
I like the idea of, what's that, Scott?
He said it always
I said it always does. It's always very, it always is. You know, your local community school and the people went there, and there's a lot of emotional ties. And, you know, and if you don't answer those questions, you're prepared to answer those questions, it's going to make your referendum process very difficult. You know, and again, that's where we come in handy, and we can help you navigate those or anticipate those questions and prepare for those questions.
And maybe that's a good segue into what I felt wasn't a good discussion we had at the full meeting. The whole notion of the if we do nothing option. I don't like that phrase. And I know we have our twin track, thanks to you, Scott, and that was a good thing that you did for us back before you were even on board, because it got us out of the mess we were in with the town meeting. But maybe in the context of looking at these alternate uses of the buildings, that's a segue to if neither project proceeded for some reason, what does that mean? To me, it means the roofs. And then, as Phil said at our last meeting, like a 10-year out commitment to all these capital projects that would do whatever they would do. But I almost think we need that third alternative so people don't say, well, you're just assuming you're going to do one of the things you want to do. What's the third alternative if we do neither? And somehow that has to happen. How does that happen in other projects, Scott?
Well, I mean, that's part of, the board and Phil's job is to maintain your existing facilities. So I know that's what Phil's working on right now is that capital improvement plan over the next 5 to 10 years. So, he has to be ready because it's not a given that you're gonna have a new project. So that's really sort of normal. We've got to go on until something else happens, and they're planning for that right now. And again, based on my walkthrough with Phil, a couple of weeks back, just looking at the existing building, pointing out some of the issues at the exterior brick and repointing. And I mean, the building is starting to fall apart. And these older buildings, they need more and more maintenance, kind of like an older car. It's going to need more attention. And there's a lot of spalling brick and brick where the mortar joints are opening up, and
Scott,
that needs to be addressed.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I get all that, and Phil, I know Phil will do his job, and if for some reason we didn't have one of the two major projects, but when you were saying we would go to the town when we're ready as a full committee for like a public input type thing, or I think we should say, here's renovated, here's the cost, here's new, here's the cost, and if neither one of those projects go forward, here's the cost in year one of new roofs, post-referendum failure or whatever. Which I don't want to say it that way, but you know what I mean.
But that's a reality. That's a possibility.
Yeah. So the reaction we got on full committee was, well, that's not a choice. We don't want to have that. And I wasn't sure why. I felt it was like negative reaction.
So I think as far as the committee's purpose and our charge is to bring forth a project that's a pre-K through 8. So I think when you look at it in that scope, do nothing is not one of our choices. But having the information from Phil and the Board of Ed to say, here's what costs would look like if neither of these projects passed at a referendum. That's what we want to look at. And so while it may not be the committee's job, maybe from the finance subcommittee standpoint, we can work with the numbers in the projects that Phil is preparing in his 5 to 10 year plan to have that discussion at our public forums to say, look, we're presenting you with a project, but at the end of the day, it's a democratic vote that may result in failure of the project we propose, which means we're back to square one, which is we continue on a path with the buildings as they stand. And what is that cost implication? Because it's more than just the CIP projects. It's also the budget, the operations costs, the increasing costs there, which there's been concern over years with our increasing per pupil expenditures and decrease enrollment, which got us to start this process. And let's see what that path looks like and the cost of all of those if nothing passes at referendum. That's how I see that third option. But from the committee standpoint, that's not an option for us because our charge is to present a pre-K through 8 project. And I think that's where I got the sense from the whole committee, from that perspective. Not that we just don't think we should think about it, but that's not our charge. But I think there's a responsibility to discuss what that financial impact is. If something fails at referendum, it does. It becomes we stay right where we are, but that's not free of charge either.
That's where I was going.
Yeah,
but I wasn't sure. Okay,
that's my sense.
That's helpful to me.
I mean, that's how I see it.
I agree. I think like our charge is to come up with a plan, whether it's renovate or do new, and to show the townspeople that if we do nothing, it's gonna cost us this much to try to stay up and running as a education system.
I mean, as a committee, we will have said, we really support this, and that's what we're going out into the public to educate on, to get, obviously, to pass at a referendum once we've determined a project. We're trying to work to get that to be the project people vote in favor of. But if that fails, here is the flip side. So that I, as a voter and a resident, have a full idea of what the impact is. Like, I don't want to be in a new school on a new site, if that's the project you bring to me. Or I don't agree with this, but wanting to let people know, okay, that's fine, and that can be your vote, but here's what that might look like in cost to you. And it may or may not be comparable to what we're talking about in a few years down the road, because Phil has shown us in the last couple of years several projects on CIP of significant value. Then you throw the roofs in there. He hasn't added anything in about 3 or 4 years. So the projects that need to be done that we knew about in the 2017 Fryer study are significant. And the cost then in 2017 was significant to us. And so, you know, you could say, do we bond to do them all at once? But then you still have the same shell of a building, which is important for people to understand that repairing those minimal things doesn't affect the envelope that you're in.
And not having seen these ed specs, we may do all that work and it still might not meet the desirable ed spec.
Well, the current building would change the ed spec. We wouldn't be looking at ed specs to do nothing with our buildings, right? That wouldn't be
right.
Our charge. We'd
Okay.
still be
the ed spec that Phil and the board is developing.
Maybe our old ed specs. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't fully understand the ed specs.
Well, because the biggest thing, and I can tell you from my time on the Board of Ed, when we started discussing this, and the reason when we started discussing, we knew there was a need, we didn't just move all the kids into one building to help with some of the operational costs and helping to keep that lower, is that we can't just physically pick up all of our kids and put them in the same building because of some of the code issues. And we talked about the where students need to be in stairwells and bathrooms. So we would be using the existing specs that we're in and nothing would change. So
what the ed spec will show, and again, we're going to do a list of pros and cons, you know, again, with each scenario. But, you know, certainly 21st century learning, we talked about flexibility of the spaces, some of the breakout areas, the way newer schools are designed. You know, no matter what you do with that existing school, there are interior windowless spaces, which from a teaching standpoint, in a standpoint of just overall environment, learning, mood, they're very poor. I mean, you don't see people doing, you know, interior windowless spaces to educate children. It's natural light. You know, certainly as you mentioned, Erica, the envelope, you know, with a CIP project, you're not necessarily touching the whole envelope. You're talking about a 100-year-old uninsulated or barely insulated building, you know, which we're going to be then comparing to a state-of-the-art, super airtight, heavily insulated, modern building that meets all the current energy codes, you know, from an operations standpoint. So, you know, the ed spec's going to go together, but I think the existing building, the ed spec needs to be written in a way of this is the ultimate, this is the facility that we feel is needed to educate the students of Willington. And the existing building may fall short in some of those areas. Doesn't necessarily mean, again, you're not going to make that decision, but everybody needs to know, you know, here was the 21st century school. And now we've taken the 21st century school and we've put that into the existing box that we have along with an addition, because the two schools combined, I can safely, absolutely say, will not fit in that existing, the building area that you have. You know, you have to have an addition. But there are going to be some you know, positives and negatives with each scenario.
And you're saying we'd have to have an addition simply because of the level of exit discharge?
No.
No.
Even if it was all on one level, you would not have enough square footage to meet the program requirements of a pre-K-8 school with the different classrooms, you know, OT, PT, special ed, support areas. All of those spaces when you look at it and add it all up, there is not enough square footage in the existing facilities on the Hall Memorial site to serve those. So that there is an addition.
So that addition, if we kept everything and didn't demolish something, would put us well over what I think the state.
Yes.
Would
You're
say
going to be over either way.
Okay.
Again, when you look at the requirements and what the state does on a standard, and when you get down to smaller schools, this is what makes it difficult because, you know, a gymnasium can only be so small, in a kitchen, and an administrative office. You can have an administrative office area. Let's say it's 1,000 square feet total with the support offices, the front reception area, storage, printing room. That could service a school for 400. That could service a school for 700. Now, 700 students gives you a lot more square footage because the state's multiplying that 700 by a magic number. So it's a lot easier to get closer to the space standards when you have more students. But that's a discussion that we've got to have with the state.
we want to keep where we are without additional cost to the town. We need to find some kids. We'll start there. We'll see if we can do it.
Well, I know Ralph too has a lot of ideas on the whole reconfiguration thing. And I don't want to digress to that right now. What I'd like to do is get back to like our gathering of numbers. So I'm thinking when do you think, Scott, you and Phil will be done with the ed specs, like in the next 2 weeks or a month? Or?
Again, I just want to say that it's not our ed spec, it's the boards and Phil's. We've provided sample ed specs. I've provided a space program, but really from that standpoint, I'm happy to review it and look for holes in it. But it's the ed spec now is really how Willington wants to educate their students. From program standpoint, requirements.
Maybe you can help us understand, and you've done this certainly with our neighbors in Mansfield. So Phil and his team are working to develop an ed spec plan that then they present to the Board of Ed, who may accept it, tweak on it, and see how much work they need to do on it. And the ed specs are not, it's number of rooms, square footage. So if you looked at the examples that we had in our Google Doc, it's more, it's not very visual, right? So it's just a lot of detail, the detail and what goes into the building. And then Scott designed something using that information. About how long from the point it is first presented to a Board of Education, do you see that approval process so that we're now looking at a solid document to work with?
It's really dependent, you know, on the Board of Ed. I mean, it's really unique to every town and community. You know, at the moment, I think we've got a reasonable handle on the space, the space matrix of these. You know, we need 2 pre-K classrooms and 2 first grade classrooms, and those have to have toilets, and we need, you know, X, Y, and Z. And I think we're pretty close on that. You know, so from a standpoint of, you know, hey, Scott, what would a new school cost on this site? That's very easy because I'm just going to do you know, we're not going to design a school, but we're going to say we need, you know, right now, let's just say 60,000 square feet. So, okay, Scott, what would a 60,000 square foot school cost on site X? You know, we'll look at the topography, development costs, utilities, you know, and we'll use current market numbers of projects that have bid. And we'll, you know, we've got a good success rate of building a good solid budget to build a building of that size on that site. And we'll also look at high, low, and mid. You know, I mean, you can build a fancier building. You can build a bare bones building. You know, what is your level? Do you want a $350 a square foot bare bones? Do you want a 400 square foot building, or do you want a $500 a square foot building? You know, we can show some examples of those differences. You know, to understand what you're getting for your money.
I think we get that.
Yeah, so it's really how in the weeds, once Phil presents his project, right, the Board of Ed gets at that point. And I think that is, to your point, how long it would take for them to approve and that portion of it move forward for us.
Or let me just get to the chase. I'd like to have like a simple spreadsheet of old, renovate, new, and just high level numbers. Do we need the ed spec to do that, Scott?
You need the building size to do that, and the spaces. Yes, we do need the requirements.
And that's will determine that way. Could we just get that information without all the other detail you just went into, so we can play around with numbers?
Again, I would just caution you, because my experience is, as soon as a number is put out in the public, that number sticks.
Right.
And people are going to remember that.
I'm backing off. And
Yeah.
I'm going to back off to a different place. I anticipated you were going to say that. So I suggest we do this in the meantime. The one thing we do know that everybody agrees on, the Board of Ed, the school building committee, and I think most of the town. And I think that's the fact that everybody agrees we should have one school, one K-8. We know that. I think that's great. We have total unanimity on that, unless I'm missing something. You guys tell me if I am.
That's the sense I get from discussions.
So I think that's a great starting point, because I think we can then say, and here's where we could do some of our own mathematics with the help from possibly Phil and yourself, Erica, we know what our per pupil cost is now. If we take our $9 million budget, and I did, it's $21,700 per student. I just divided the total. I know it's not the state formula, Scott, but that's how I do it.
The state formula is.
It's very complicated. The busing comes out.
There's numbers in there that I don't know.
Yeah, I do it the way Dave Harding, our former superintendent, told me to do it, which was just divide total dollars by total students. And Erica's heard me complain as the town budget hawk about that at meetings. I think what the town's excited about is we can finally address that.
Lower that. That's why we started this. When I was in the Board of Ed, that's why we started.
Well, I was always bugging you from the
like, until we're in one building. Yes. It's hard to get that number down.
So what I would like to do is model this out as a subcommittee. If we have a generic K-8 school, new or renovated, what would that cost become? Because now we're going to be a single building, a single administration, busing to one place, which would go up or down, I'm told, but everything else is going to be more cost effective. This is going to make it attractive to the town.
Okay. You're saying take a look at the budget.
And then when we get to the matrix I want to get to, that Scott says we can't do it until we know what the specs are, then if you tell me that our new per pupil cost, not me, the town, but it'll start with me, Justin, and yourself here on the subcommittee, that our current cost is almost $22,000 per student, but let's say our cost in a renovated school is going to be $21,000, and our cost in a new school is going to be $15,000. No brainer to me. That's kind of like the simple direction I'd like to go in, because I think we can do that right now.
So but
we need to know how our $9 million budget goes to a single K-8 budget that might be, I don't know, 7 million, whatever. I'm just throwing out numbers.
Right. And I know Phil has certainly been cautious of putting out too much of a number out there, because then you get people worried about what positions wouldn't create.
He said that, and I read that Mansfield eliminated 11 teachers when they went from 3 schools to 1.
Yeah, well, and we know what we can do. Once we've decided a project, it's a little easier to say that. We recognize that. Before that, Phil has some concern, especially if until something is passed, of people leaving thinking they're going to be gone, and then we still are in this limbo for how long, and he's without staffing. So I know that's been some of the concern, but I think we can look at that without divulging
making
specifics.
A big public thing,
right? Or saying we're going to eliminate this position, this position.
No,
Phil has given us a number. You're saying let's look at that budget and do the work ourselves.
Has he given you a K number?
I think in years past I've heard him.
I remember Dave Harding.
Dave Harding did. I think they both said roughly that they would just very high level preliminary start at about $500,000 or $600,000.
That I remember about.
Yeah.
I remember that about 700,000 is what I remember.
Yes.
Now we could update that. We could look at that. Yeah. We could get general information. I don't want to go into who's being eliminated or whatever. I want to do
if
that.
We take a look at their budget.
Maybe no one's eliminated. I don't know. I don't want to go there. But what I think would be cool, I want your guys' input as well as yours, Scott, is if we could then say, okay, we now know, just based on a generic K-8 model, that our per pupil cost will go from what it is now to a new number. And right now, then go back to our full committee and say, does this make sense to proceed with a project? Because we've never had that discussion.
Sure.
And I like that premise. You know,
You're
I
saying
know
if the project keeps us at the same per pupil, do you think it's worth it?
I mean,
And I think it makes it harder to sell. And that's what we're trying to do, right? We're gonna come up with a project we like, and ideally, we're trying to get the townspeople to
Right.
vote in favor of that project.
Correct.
Our end goal is a yes vote at a referendum. That is our goal. And we need to know all of the factors that go into this project, and this is one of them.
if we say that our per pupil cost is going to go from 21,700 to 20,000 for a student, everyone's going to say, why should we do this project? You know, now I'm not saying cost is the only reason to build a new school. There are other reasons to build a new school, subjective reasons, you know, just the value it brings to the community and so on and so forth. But I think this would be a great starting point while we're waiting for Scott and Phil to know what those numbers are, go back to the full committee and say, let's have a discussion. Should we have a project? We think, not think, we know our current cost. We think a single K-8, which the community has expressed support for, would be X. Is that a good thing? And then, Scott, I think that shapes the two alternatives. Which one better supports a cost-effective solution for the community?
I'm okay with that, Peter, as long as our idea is that we're not trying to get the committee to not support a project, but have it be as part of the discussion to get to the project. Because again, our charge is to present a pre-K through 8. That was what came from the Board of Ed to the town, and that's what we voted on as a committee. So I think that needs to be our goal, and it would be, I would not be in favor of getting the committee to decide we're not going to do this. We should, that's not our charge, right? So our charge is to present
No,
the
we
committee.
would present, here are the numbers.
Right.
We're just a dispassionate group here.
Yeah.
Let's just say, here's the numbers. Let's have a discussion. Does this project, whether in renovated or new, make sense for us to present to the community? We've never had that discussion. As you said, it was like
because I think it's just one piece of the
how
puzzle.
else do we get off the dime is my thought. You know, and I thought this would be one good way of doing that. It's one element. It's not the only deciding factor.
So what do you see needed for from us to move forward to have that discussion?
I would like to sharpen that number. What would a K-8 on a existing site per Ralph and Mike's presentations, or a new site, what would that operating cost be? What would that per pupil cost be? You know, in just 10,000 feet numbers, not, oh, we're gonna have X number of positions and no.
We're talking about just operating.
There has to
The
be.
operating costs include positions, so that is something we have to look at. We don't have to divulge what that is.
Right.
But we can work with Phil to say, look, we've looked at it and we think this is the number we can get to, without saying it eliminates this or it adds this. I think keep it high.
We want to just break down that number into building, maintenance, heat, staff. We're not going to say what staff is, you know, it would just be a number.
Okay. So why don't we start with the current budget they have, and I can speak.
Last year's.
Last year. Well, let's use the one that they proposed.
The one they
for this
proposed,
year.
yeah.
We might as well use the proposed. It at least has new costs in it. I know we're not at the point we know it's been accepted, but we know that's probably the maximum number. I don't see anybody adding to it. And start from there, and then I can have a discussion with Phil about what kinds of things he thinks would need to be added or eliminated.
Now, obviously, Phil's a key guy here.
Right, and if we remove those costs from there, then we'll have a fuller picture, and we can say, all right, here's the number we
Very
looked at.
generically, we don't want to say we're going to have 3 janitors instead of
That's
one.
why I'm saying if I had that conversation with Phil offline to bring back to you, like, this is the budget and this is the cost of staff now. Staff would have been X and now it's X. We don't know what that X is made up of. Like, I don't mind sharing that, but this is what that looks like. So it's not out there in the public that we're proposing to cut into that. But at minimum, we would need this staffing. Because I think the staffing.
What you'll see is that number will have a dramatic effect on the mill rate increase for the project, the overall bonding. I mean, if you're talking anywhere from, let's just say $600,000 to $700,000 a year, you know, $600,000 to $700,000 on a 20-year bond buys a lot of money. You know, that buys a lot of projects, especially if you've got a reasonable reimbursement rate from the state. So yeah, that's really important when you're selling the project is yeah, the project's costing X, but with the savings of Y, when you factor it in, here's the final mill rate impact. And it may be very
I
negligible.
think that's how Willing
Yes,
thinks.
I think
you
so
know,
too.
I think that we're that kind of town. Mansfield probably just wants to increase everything. No, but
No, believe me,
They definitely don't.
I haven't met a town that didn't feel that way. It's you know, everybody's going to be sensitive to the mill rate.
It's trying to weigh that on, you know, offering a 21st century facility for 21st century learners, and it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, and does that cost you a cup of coffee a week? You know, to go from, you know, your current facility that you know you're going to be putting a lot of money into for maintenance, you know, especially in 100-year-old and 60, 70-year-old buildings, versus a brand new state-of-the-art building. Not to mention natural light, ventilation, you know, just all the other things that come with a building of you know, a newer structure. But you're right on target. That's exactly what we need to do. The key is, you know, and you know, Phil needs to be a little bit conservative because it's a matter of when you build a new school, what staff are going to choose to retire? Is it going to be your higher echelon staff? Would you maybe terminate positions on a lower pay scale level? You know, so we always encourage the superintendents to be a little conservative here. You know, don't promise that we're going to save 800,000, and ultimately a number of the people that get laid off are the lower echelon staff, and we only save 7 or 6. I'd rather say we're going to save 7 or 6, and then a whole bunch of the higher salaried people retire, and you end up saving 8. It makes it look even better. So you always want to be a little bit conservative with these numbers to make sure that you meet or exceed what you promise the people.
And so Scott, one of the things, because we're going from 2 schools to 1, we're not just renovating one building. And when we start looking at the staffing is one piece. We have heating costs in 2 buildings, electricity in 2 buildings and going to 1. So if we were again doing this, would you say we should use the square footage of Hall School as our starting point? If we base it just on the size, our generic school on just the size of that of Hall School currently. Yeah, I know you're saying we would need a little bit larger if we stayed on that site. But if I recall from some of the discussions before, about 60 to 63,000 is what, if we were building a new building, the state would reimburse up to. Is that correct?
Well, they'll reimburse more, but what it does is it ratchets down your percentage of reimbursement. So let's say you're at 80% rate and you're 20% over in square footage. So, you know, you're from 60 to 72,000. Okay. So you're now 20% oversized, but the state says, hey, you know, Scott, I understand your logic. We need all the basic things to support a school, and we don't have enough classrooms and kids, so we're not going to meet that space standard. So they agree. What they would do then is reduce your 80% by 20%. You know, so then your reimbursement rate goes down to 68%. So it's 68% of the full cost of the project.
So in our initial analysis, if we just use Hall School and the 60,000 square feet, it's in, and use that as our number.
Yeah,
we're going to be talking about if we build new or renovate to new, we're talking about a more energy efficient facility.
Exactly.
So
Scott, can you help Phil with that? Because he'll have to figure out how much Phil's heating 2 old buildings right now.
Right. Well, and where we would start there is we would start with your current utility bills. You know, get all the utilities, get your power, get your gas, everything that you're doing, pull that together. Now, the one thing you will see, though, is some of the savings with a new energy efficient building will be offset because code mandated ventilation rates are different. You get a lot more fresh air, treated fresh air in a school now than, you know, you've got some spots in the existing Hall Memorial School that have no ventilation. I don't want to even go there. I mean, you got to do something there. There's got to be ventilation put in, but you know, so you'll lose a little bit of the savings, but it's, I shouldn't say lose, you're improving the air quality. And especially when we get stuck with a pandemic for the past 2 years. We've got classrooms where it's 100% dedicated outside air. You're not circulating air from classroom A to classroom B in these new schools. And you're changing the air over in the classrooms more. So that new technology and that new approach to design in a healthy building is going to cost a little bit more to run. But when you look at the intrinsic, value of the health of the students and teachers, how do you put a price on that? So you won't necessarily see, well, all I'm trying to say is when we look at my past history, when you look at an older building utilities and you look at the new building utilities, it's not going to be super dramatic because you have to take into account the new building codes, ventilation rates in a healthy building that you're creating, that it sometimes takes a little bit more energy to use.
Even with 2 schools right now?
Oh, you're going to see an energy savings, but it's not going to cut in half, is in essence what I'm saying.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I got long-winded. I should have just kept it simple.
It's okay.
I tend to do that.
I'm sure I understood everything you're saying there.
Yeah, we just may assume that we're going to see this big dip, and it doesn't always work that way.
The biggest dip you'll see is in staffing, in maintenance, long-term maintenance. I mean, especially with, all new finishes, materials, newer materials that are cheaper to maintain, floors that don't require waxing, linoleum floors and floors that all you have to do is damp mop it. You're plowing, and again, both of your buildings are older. I mean, you've got piping in those buildings that are, it's 100-year-old pipes. They're not going to last forever. You build a new building with, PEX, pipes instead of the copper. And I mean, 50 years, that stuff's going to look the way it does today. So the newer technologies, building maintenance is going to be a huge factor long-term. You're going to see a lot of those savings.
All right, so that's what we want to work on now, because the work Scott can really do with us as far as the new project really won't come until we see some ed specs and we have project costs, at which point.
Honestly, once the board says, yes, Scott, a building of X square feet is what we need, and this is what we need, I can develop those budgets very quickly. Again, the one I'm going to be cautious on is from a site development standpoint. Again, we need to be confident we have an understanding of, if it's a new building, what the site is and what those development costs could be. Because again, we've seen if you rush a little bit too much and if you throw a number out there in the public and then that number changes, the public loses confidence in the committee and the process. What you told me it was going to be, X million, and now you're telling me it's $5 million more. Why? What happened? And you're going to lose people. So
and that's a little bit of the same with the exercise we're doing here. I don't want us to do this and once we say a number that's out there, like, look, we think it can be 15,000, per pupil instead of the 21 plus that it is now. We want to be cautious of that. Look, if we could get it to 15,000 per pupil, that would be great.
We all celebrate.
We would.
You'd probably be the lowest in the state.
Probably.
From all the numbers I've seen over the years.
It might be a pipe dream, but we'll just use it as our pretend number.
That's good. I think, getting that generic building per people cost would be helpful, and I think we could discuss it in our next meeting. And
when were you hoping to shoot for our next meeting? And I asked because certainly Phil's working on ed specs, Phil's working on a current budget, Phil's working on being the superintendent of the schools that are in session now, and then adding assistance with this onto his plate. It's not some information that we're going to be able to develop immediately.
I understand. what's reasonable, do you think, for Phil to get together that generic, or should we just all take a copy of the budget and start circling?
Right, so you can each take a copy of the budget and start with that, and I would say start with that, and then I, can work with Phil to try to get some
what he
more
thinks.
preliminary information. And, do we want to say 2 weeks, 3 weeks before we meet again? If we meet once a month, so we look into April.
That's.
And you all tell me what your schedules are like, certainly evenings.
You
start to get a little bit easier into April, but there's
still
still lots of budget things
Yeah.
and SBC meetings. I don't know what your schedule lends you to, but if we keep it to, kind of a minimum, and we wanted to meet an hour prior to a board, an SBC meeting, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
That's a good thought.
Kind of piggyback that time frame. I certainly don't have children, so.
Justin's
I know we start cutting into dinner time. I know that's pretty tough.
I'm open to that if you guys want to piggyback on the regular meeting. That's all in one night.
To maybe shoot for the Wednesday the 6th. We meet at 6:30, so maybe 5:30. We can meet as a committee first. And if we think we're going to delay, we can, have communication amongst the three of us.
The other general thoughts I had for us as like a numbers group is getting a sense of who our audience is, taxpayers, their ability to pay, demographically what they look like. And that's why I brought up the CCM. I used to use that a lot when I was on the Board of Finance. Yeah, I had like a password or something to let me get in, and then I could request targeted data from like these cool people that did stuff. It was great.
So I can request data from CCM. I don't know if they've changed the model a little bit since then. So CCM is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Okay. So
are we still members?
Yes, currently 169, all 169 towns are members of CCM. So they will do research for us. The one thing they don't do, and it would have to be a very rare case, is collect data on all 169 town.
I care about Wellington.
Right, so they'll look at Wellington, they'll give us other towns. So I do have some demographics we can share for you that that just recently came out. The one thing that's off on it, and our human services director and I were looking at the other day, is the population. It still has a 58 to change, not the new 55, 66. But I'll share that particular document with you so you can look at the demographics. And that's very helpful for sure. So I'm not sure that the percentages would be too far off with the additional 300 individuals less, because I really think that number is an anomaly based on the census, simply because of COVID and people not physically being here. So I'll share that data with you, and I think that's very helpful data currently.
What I'm trying to get a sense of is, whatever our project ultimately is, and whatever the bonding schedule ultimately is, what's that impact going to be on a middle of the road Wellington taxpayer? How does that affect them?
And what we'll typically do is you give a range of medium priced homes. You'll give sort of the low, the median, and the high price range homes, assessed value, which is 70%. And then you show a chart to the public and you'll say, okay, here's the mill rate. And again, depending on how it's financed, typically the first few years, it may start out slow, may ramp up a little bit and then start falling back down. But so everybody can look and say, okay, I've got a $180,000 home. I've got a $250,000 home. I've got a $490,000 home. That's what it's going to affect me. So we always look at sort of the low, mid, higher range within the specific communities, and then tailor the mill rate impact to each one of those for the project. So it's a real clear way for the public to understand what the costs are going to be for them.
I think that's important.
Oh, absolutely.
That's something I think we could talk about in the subcommittee and see how it looks, and maybe bring back information to the larger committee. The other thought I had was, aside from state reimbursement, especially since now tonight we're talking about potential repurposing and other uses of the buildings, is alternate sources of funding for us besides this school reimbursement from the state. What are they? You know, Hall School is a federal historic site of some kind, or predates, I think, the register of federal historic buildings. It's all.
I thought it wasn't considered.
I think it was.
It
I
wasn't.
think it was. It's got some. It's not a historical district like the district here at the Green. So it's got some significance, but not in the sense like it can't be torn down. So.
But I'm just wondering if there's funding out there for a historic building of that nature, and that's just one potential funding source. And I don't know if there is or isn't on the state or federal level, but I'd like to find out. And also, you had mentioned it at one point, Scott, in your interview with us, and I was thinking about it even before that. If we just blew up the model, which is a good exercise for us in this subcommittee, because we can just do whatever we want, and said, no, we don't want to do state reimbursement. We'll fund this project, or we'll self-fund. What does that mean? Because then the project could be different. It doesn't have to be what the state says it should be. It'd be what we would want to do. Just a thought. I'm not saying.
Well, I hear you.
I know it sounds crazy, but
look, does it sound crazy? Yes. Is it a little like? Is it ideal if we want to no holds barred and our own say? Yes. But if we're worried about how the cost implications would be to our population with significant state funding,
could even be worse.
How could we possibly say, look, if we know at one point we were looking at $45 million, without the state, it's $45 million. That's the cost. With the state cost to us, it would be, you know, I think, are we at 53%?
I'd have to look that up. Give me a moment. I can find that out.
Or for renovation. But let's say new 53%, then we'd be that much less. So that's certainly an easier sell to the taxpayer than the whole enchilada. So the amount to taxpayers, unless we had some other revenue source, and I'm not sure what that would be for building purposes, that would be, in my mind, an impossible solution. I don't know that I would support that, because I know that our town couldn't fund that. We're not a granite.
So I'm not saying support it.
Right.
That's not
How
really
would we fund it?
I just want to know what it is. What would it be compared to this reimbursement formula everybody uses?
But Scott's going to give us the cost of the project. So we're going to know what the cost of the project is, correct, Scott? And then the state reimbursement portion.
Yeah, I'll factor in. I mean, again, not everything will be reimbursed by the state. You know, so you won't get, and you're right, the 2021 rate, let's see, general construction new, actually 2022 rate is 53.93% for new construction, 63.93% for renovation. But now, not everything would be reimbursed at that rate. There are some things that would be ineligible or limited eligible costs.
Like what?
Well, athletic fields are limited eligible. Anything over the property line. So let's just say you were bringing water to a site, or you had to do improvements in the road or make tie-ins. A lot of times you have to make utility tie-ins, storm sewer to a roadway. As soon as you go over your property line, any work over the property line is ineligible. The percentage of design fees associated with all of the ineligibles. So what they do is you take all your ineligible construction costs, and maybe that's 3% of your overall construction dollars, then 3% of all your architect design fees and all those other fees are ineligible. And there's a form that the state, we fill out for you on your behalf for the state, working with the estimators, and if you have a construction manager, whoever it is, we'll identify all those ineligibles. But there's a whole list of, you know, potentially ineligible costs.
Part of the budget that you would provide to us when we have more specifics on the two, a new and a renovate to new, we'll see the whole cost, and then
we'll give you an estimated state share and estimated Willington share of the total project costs. Yes.
Just an off the wall thing.
Sure. Hey, look, maybe there's somebody paying attention and we say, look, our project is going to be $46 million and someone generously wants to donate 46 million. Maybe one of us hits the lottery.
Let me ask you a question, Scott. When do these projects go in a self-funding direction or non-reimbursement direction? Have you ever seen it?
If you live in Greenwich, yes.
Okay.
Outside of Lower Fairfield County or the private schools we deal with, no.
And the reality is, oftentimes they come up with the private ones. You're seeing it's funded from.
Yeah, if private school, it's private. Yeah, I mean they're not looking for state funds, and yeah. You know when you get down to the communities that have reimbursement rates of 10%, you know 10% to jettison any oversight from the state and do exactly what you want. That's the decisions they make. But I would say, 99% of the time, the communities are looking for that state support as part of the project funding.
I was just going to say, based on what Scott told us earlier about our population and being constrained with square footage, if we went unfunded, I don't think we're going to be going smaller. So it's not going to benefit us to try to go outside that because we're going to be going bigger.
Listen,
yeah, and what we'll do, what we do is,
I think about funded something, so maybe I'll put that.
We're your advocate through the process with the state, to help guide the process and maximize your reimbursement. I should say again that the state is not developing the ed spec. This isn't the state school. This is Wellington School, where Phil and his administration, working with the Board of Education, is going to develop the ed spec for what they feel is the best, most appropriate school to educate the students of Wellington. Then we will take that ed spec to the state and we'll say, okay, here's our ed spec, here's our square footage, here's our students, and we will have the discussion with them to see, how far down the road they will fund the overall project.
That's comforting to hear because of some of the feedback I'm getting from the community, from people who listen to our meetings. A lot of people listen to our meetings.
I like to hear that.
Interesting to me. Feel that they're getting the sense, and I as well, that the project will be defined by the reimbursement. That we're chasing the money. And I think the project should define the cost, and then they should reimburse us. We should decide what's right for us.
But I think what we've gotten from, and I know the couple of times that I met with the previous director there, and there is a change over there, so I hope it's, the culture will be a little bit different, was that there were some things you followed with them and they decided this, but the envelope of the building was not one of them, right? You bring them your project and then how they supported it was different. So I've never gotten the sense from my
meetings with
OSCGR that they were dictating what you were putting within your facility. That was still on you. But
it sounds that way in our meetings when we're talking
because
about it.
The former director was clear on we're the majority stakeholder. So we
did say that, you're right.
He said that a lot, and he said that when we met him separately too. So and what that meant to him and what that meant to me were two very different things. They handled the money, but still the building and what went into it was on the town that was building.
Absolutely, it's your decision, and they may just say we're not funding things like a pool. A pool is limited eligible. Laptop computers, if it's something that somebody can pick up and walk away with, they won't fund it. If it's a computer lab with towers that are permanently installed, that they'll fund. So, and all their guidelines are printed. It's all on the state website, so you can go in, you can read it, and you can see, they'll have lists of this is what we will fund and this is what we won't. But ultimately, it's your decision. If you want to say, hey guys, we want to do this, and we understand you're not going to fund it, that's fine. And that goes on the ineligible list. And the state says, okay, we've all agreed, that's ineligible. You guys are paying the full boat on that. Absolutely, yes, we are. And that's part of the process.
That was my sense. We'll tell you what we'll pay for, and then you do what you want outside of that. But we're going to tell you what we're going to pay for. Whether you want something extra, it's going to be on you. Whether you disagree with me, there was no discussion after that. What we said goes. Now that may change on some of those things, but I always got the sense that the building we chose to build was on us. And if we wanted to, let's say with Hall School, and I know we got the sense from him that that wasn't a direction they would go in supporting that renovation, but that was just with their money. That didn't mean we couldn't go in that direction.
Right.
And I think we wanted state money at that time, they may not have supported approving their funds, but that always we could still do what we wanted. If we didn't need their money, then we're not knocking on their door.
I mean, they've been going back and forth on auditoriums, whether they would or would not fund them for a middle school. What is clear though, when they fund an auditorium, they will only fund it for half of the student body. So in other words, in your case, you could build an auditorium that would house 200 people. Now, a 200-person auditorium is not a very large auditorium. So again, the community may decide, you know, when it comes to that time, you know, we want an auditorium for 400 people. The state would say there's a formula for that. You know, how much area is the seating, the square footage? What is the cost of the auditorium? They will only pay for half of it in essence. But again, you're going to have that understanding up front. You're going to know what those eligible and ineligible costs are. You know, but this, you know, in the state also, I mean, at the same time, they're not going to say, you know, for 200 kids, they're not going to say build a 150,000 square foot building. They're going to walk away from that. I mean, you know, there is a point where sanity takes over.
We're following that the Mansfield saga.
Yeah, that would be quite a building. I don't see us going that direction.
My last numbers question is, since we started this project, material costs seem to be escalating dramatically. I'm sure, Scott, you're going to take that into consideration.
Yeah, we typically look to escalating our budget estimates out to the anticipated start of construction date. And we'll build a percentage in to carry for each year. Historically, up until recent events, it's been around 3.5%. You know, within the past year, we've seen a 10% increase. You know, hopefully we're going to see things stabilize. Again, you know, this crazy war has thrown a whole wrench into things as well. But yes, we absolutely will present what we feel is an appropriate escalation to carry for the project budget. We'll escalate it. We'll review that again with the committee. And in the state will make, you know, they'll ask those questions too. You know, what, you know, did you provide escalation? Do you have contingency? You know, you're never going to build a project without having construction contingency.
No, we have full confidence in you as a professional. What I'm saying to the three of us is, I have a feeling this project's going to cost a lot more than we thought. Now that we are where we are.
Right, and we saw it go up.
But the Fryer numbers may all be wrong.
Well, we know they are. We saw when we went back to Fryer and they redid 2 options from 2017 to 2019, we saw a significant increase. So even if we just took 2022 numbers, forget about where we're at after a pandemic and then added, you know, what's happening in the Ukraine, that's a whole new ballgame. So those Fryer numbers, we know are out the window. They're unrealistic at this point.
Well, I think
they're starting.
I think that's where the town still is. You know what I mean? Like, but they haven't caught up.
Sure.
You know, so we may want to look at that.
Right. I mean, we can say it, but I think to Scott's point, we don't want to be putting any other numbers. We know we have a study that had numbers that were good in 2017, but they also were generic numbers. They didn't speak to the project that we're going to propose. That's going to be specific to Willington in our current day. And those are numbers that came in as a study that was based on nothing that was derived from Board of Ed or specific ed specs. And so that's what I would say, if folks are asking what numbers we had, we can, you know, direct them to the study, but those numbers are really completely out of date and old. And they don't hold to a particular project. They were a general concept idea. So, and they, you know, they were pretty in line with what we were seeing at the time, but I mean,
yeah,
just to see the escalation between those 2 years was shocking.
I don't think it does us good to put another number out though, be off of that number.
Yeah.
No, I understand. I'm just sensing that this is going to be more than we had in our minds, I guess.
It's going to go, I mean,
I think I have a number in my mind that I'd be surprised if the number that I have in my mind is if it's close to, but yeah, maybe because I've been in it for so long, I know that those numbers aren't there, and I continuously look at escalate them. So we're not looking at a $20 million starting line. You know, we're talking.
I know we're not Holland, but for example, if we have to purchase property, has that dramatically changed even in Wellington since 2017?
I don't think it's changed that
I
much.
don't know.
Do you have
I'm
an idea of that? Phil?
Change that much personally.
It's not.
I don't know,
I mean-
not basic property. I mean, there's been a little bit of escalation, but
I think material costs is gonna be the biggest.
that's what we're looking at. Again, I'm holding out for donation of land, but I don't know what's happening. It's just a whole. So we have no land. The land subcommittee, I just saw that they're meeting again on Monday. So maybe I think Scott, so you're meeting with them to discuss the list we had already looked at as a group, right? You had looked at that, so they're looking at that. So
Yeah, and we got an additional list of I don't even know how many parcels, I believe late on Wednesday. So yeah, the second list that we had, we're going to discuss that with the committee on Monday. We're diving into that.
The whole cost associated with land was not just the purchase price of the land, it was the development on the land. So I think the purchase price of land is still well in a reasonable area. It's what needs to be developed on that land, and that's
Ralph has talked a lot about that.
Yeah, it depends on where it is. If we're talking about developing something in the middle of Moose Meadow Road,
Right.
as opposed to something sitting on 32. So
You're not going to get away from there's going to be some significant land development costs even in the existing site to get the ball fields in, the regrading that we sort of touched base on the other night at the building committee. Potentially if there's a building addition where your septic may need to be relocated, additional parking created, leveling off the field a little bit more to try and get a baseball, softball field along with the soccer. Either way, there isn't a zero cost scenario for land development.
No, I think the purchase price of the land, I think, is the least of our concern. That's probably the most manageable cost.
Yeah, I haven't, looking at the appraised values of the parcels that we've been evaluating, I was quite surprised. I think a lot of the land costs are very reasonable right now based on the values that we've gotten in the spreadsheet from town planning.
I hope if we get into a discussion of a generic school on a generic site and we plug a number in there on what's out there commercially, we can just keep it quiet.
Yeah, I agree.
So that we don't.
Well, and that's why those conversations are happening in an executive session, and not because you're trying to hide something, but you're talking about land acquisition, and what you don't want to do is someone knows to talk about their land and then boom, comes.
Right.
I
I wouldn't want to cause that.
No. And we don't want someone to think we're, that there's some sort of land grab like that. None of those things are happening. And the more you have that discussion out there, the more misinformation happens.
Right.
So, all right. So I'm going to work on gathering some of those preliminary figures. If you all each want to look at the budget, I believe it's out there, but I've got a copy to you all, most current.
Do you have one in Excel that
Oh, I'm sure it's on Excel. I'll see how Phil will give it to me.
Okay.
I have it in a PDF version. I definitely don't have it in Excel. But maybe you want to share it.
That would be better than a paper one.
Sure.
Then you just want to fool around with it. We can.
And then right now we'll tentatively plan to meet at 5:30, about 6:30. 5:30, so we'll have about an hour meeting prior to our
before the regular. That'll be good. We'll all freshen our minds. So
sure.
And then maybe by then we could have a potential, where we think we might be in a generic 60,000 square foot building for per pupil cost. That would be great. We segue to a general conversation in the regular meeting. If Catherine can put it on the agenda or some such thing.
Okay. And we have one more meeting between now and then. Yeah, we have a meeting next week.
Right. Thanks, Scott.
So seeing nothing else, I will move to adjourn at 5:25.
Is there anything else we're supposed to do with something maybe Erica that we don't know? Okay.
Scott, thank you for